The police station doors exploded open. A small girl hit the wet tile floor, scrambled up on shaking legs, and ran straight past the front desk, past the uniformed officers, past every adult in the room, directly to the man in the navy uniform and the German shepherd at his side. She grabbed the dog with both hands and buried her face in his fur. Her voice was barely a sound. "Please, she's coming. Please don't let her take me back." The dog did not move. The man crouched, and every officer in that lobby went completely still. Subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Marcus Webb had not planned to be inside the Copper Falls Police Department at 9:47 on a Tuesday night in January. He had planned to be in and out in 20 minutes. Interagency K-9 training documentation. Routine paperwork from a joint exercise that had wrapped that afternoon. The kind of administrative task that accumulated at the edges of deployments and had to be cleared before the next cycle began. He was 30 years old, short dark brown hair, his NWU Type 3 uniform still on, because he had come straight from the training site, the digital camouflage green and brown looking slightly out of place under the fluorescent lights of a small city police lobby in Wisconsin. Scout walked at his left side, 4 years old, tan gold and black, amber eyes that moved across the room in one smooth sweep and then settled into the alert calm of a dog that had assessed an environment and found nothing requiring immediate action. The desk officer, a young man named Garrett, nodded when they came in. "Evening." His eyes went to Scout, with a mixture of admiration and caution that most people defaulted to around working dogs. "Sign in. I'll let Sergeant Dupont know you're here." Marcus signed his name. He turned toward the side corridor where the administrative offices were. He took 4 steps. The doors behind him slammed open with the specific force of something pushed by more than wind. Marcus turned. A small figure slipped on the wet tile and went down hard, one knee, then both hands, a cry that was not pain but fear. And then she was back on her feet, with the scrambling urgency of someone for whom staying down was not an option. She was 6 years old, maybe small for 6. She wore a purple coat that had been soaked through and was missing its top buttons, one boot gone, a sock already gray from the slush and snow. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. Her eyes were enormous. She looked at Garrett. She looked at the 2 officers visible through the back corridor. She looked at Marcus. Then she looked at Scout. She ran to the dog, not to Marcus, not to the officers, to the dog. She dropped to her knees in front of Scout and wrapped both arms around his neck and pressed her face into his fur and held on with the grip of someone who has been calculating the distance to something safe and is finally there. Scout went absolutely still. Not stiff, not uncertain. Still in the specific way of a working dog that has shifted from neutral to something else without being told to. His amber eyes tracking the lobby. His chest rising and falling, in the measured breath of an animal that understood the situation required steadiness. Marcus crouched. He put his hand on the child's back and felt the violent shaking running through her entire frame, felt the soaked-through cold of the coat, felt underneath both of those things the specific rigidity of a child who had learned to hold herself together by force of will. "Hey," he said. His voice was low, not soft exactly, steady. The voice he used in places where softness could be mistaken for uncertainty. "I've got you. What's your name?" She didn't answer immediately. Her face was still in Scout's fur. "His name is Scout," Marcus said. "He's not going anywhere. Neither am I." A pause, then, muffled, "Ava." Ava. He kept his hand on her back, feeling the shaking slowly begin to ease by 1 degree. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Then she pulled back just far enough to look at him, and her eyes were the eyes of a child who had been afraid for a long time and was performing a rapid, exhausted calculation about whether this was finally a place she could stop. "She's coming," she whispered. "She always comes, and I have to go back, and I can't." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her face back into Scout's neck. Marcus looked at Garrett, who was already on his feet behind the desk, hand near the radio, expression caught between procedure and instinct. "Has anyone called in a missing child tonight?" Marcus asked. Garrett checked his screen, shook his head. "Nothing in the last 2 hours." "Get DuPont," Marcus said. Scout's chest rumbled. Not a bark, not aggression. A low, vibrating sound that Marcus had heard from him exactly 3 times before. All 3 in the 4 seconds before something went badly wrong. He put his hand on the dog's back, not to restrain, to acknowledge. Scout's ears were forward, his eyes were on the door. Marcus looked at the door. A woman came through it. She was late 30s, blonde hair pulled back precisely, Copper Falls PD uniform immaculate despite the weather outside, badge catching the fluorescent light. She moved through the entrance with the ease of someone walking into a room that belongs to her, which, technically, it did. Her eyes found Ava in under 2 seconds. Her expression arranged itself into something warm and concerned with the speed of a person who has made that arrangement before. "Ava," she said. Her voice was modulated, careful. "Sweetheart, you scared me half to death." Ava's hands tightened in Scout's fur. Her entire body went rigid against the dog's side. Scout's rumble deepened. The woman looked at Marcus. Her expression did not change, but something underneath it recalibrated. She was looking at the uniform, processing the canine, reassessing the situation she had walked into. "I'm Officer Karen Voss," she said. "I'm so sorry about this. She has a history of episodes when she's overwhelmed. Flight responses. She's in my foster care." She looked at Ava with the practiced softness of concern. "Honey, it's okay. Let's go home." Ava did not move. She did not look at Karen. She pressed herself tighter against Scout, and her breathing went shallow and fast. Marcus stayed crouched. He did not stand. He did not move aside. He kept his body positioned so that Ava was behind his right shoulder, and Scout was between the child and the room. And he looked at Karen Voss with the unhurried attention of a man trained to read the difference between what a situation appeared to be and what it actually was. "She seems pretty clear to me," he said. Karen's jaw moved, 1 degree, barely visible. "Children in trauma can seem very clear when they're actually confused," she said. Her tone was still warm, still professional, the tone of someone delivering expertise. "I've been working with her for 4 months. This is a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" Marcus asked. "Running," Karen said simply. "She runs when she's afraid of consequences. She tells stories. It's part of why she's in placement." She looked at Ava again. "Ava, look at me." Ava did not look at her. Scout stepped forward, half a step, deliberate, and repositioned his body so the angle between Karen and Ava increased. It was not aggressive. It was geometric. It was the movement of an animal that had made a decision about where the boundary was. Karen looked at the dog. For the first time, something moved behind her eyes that was not the arranged concern. "Is that animal under control?" "Yes," Marcus said. "He's responding to stress indicators. That's what he's trained to do." Sergeant Ray DuPont came through the back corridor at that moment, drawn by Garrett's radio call. He was 55, gray-haired, thick through the shoulders, with the permanent expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by the human capacity for complexity and was simply managing it, one incident at a time. He looked at Scout. He looked at Ava. He looked at Karen. He looked at Marcus. His face did not change, but his eyes moved through the scene with the careful inventory of someone cataloging things he would need to remember. "What have we got?" he said. "Child came in distressed," Marcus said. "Requesting protective intervention." "She's my placement," Karen said. Her voice had gained an edge now, just enough to be heard. "I have documentation. I have guardianship authorization. I'd like to take her home." "She doesn't want to go," Marcus said. "Children often don't want to do what's best for them," Karen said. She turned fully toward DuPont. "Sergeant, I understand the procedure, but I've been out in the snow looking for her for 40 minutes. She has a routine. Structure is important for kids like Ava. The longer this takes, the harder it gets to settle her down." DuPont looked at Ava. The child had not moved, had not looked up, had not released Scout. Her face was still pressed into the dog's neck, and her hands were still fists in his fur. "She say anything?" DuPont asked Marcus. Marcus stood slowly. He kept his body between Karen and Ava as he rose. "She said she's coming when she came through the door. She said she can't go back." He paused. "She also said, please." Something moved in DuPont's face. He had heard that word from children before. Not the word itself, the specific weight behind it. The weight of a word that is the last thing a person says when every other option has run out. He looked at Karen. "We slow down," he said. "We verify." Karen inhaled. "Ray?" Her voice dropped, taking on the register of two colleagues talking. The register that excluded Marcus, that drew a line around departmental familiarity. "I have the paperwork. I have authorization. This man," she gestured toward Marcus, carefully, not dismissively, "is not from this department. He doesn't have standing here." "He has standing as a civilian making a child welfare observation," DuPont said. His voice was flat. "And my canine just gave me a stress indicator on you, so we slow down." He looked at Garrett. "Get Diane Cho on the phone. CPS after-hours line." Karen's expression held. She was good at holding it, but something at the edges of her composure had thinned in the last 30 seconds. Thinned in the way that composure thins when the situation is not resolving the way it was supposed to resolve. "This is unnecessary," she said. "Maybe," DuPont said, "but we're doing it." Marcus looked down at Ava, who had finally lifted her face from Scout's fur. She was looking up at him with a question that children ask not with words, but with every other part of themselves. The question of whether the decision he had just helped DuPont make was going to hold, or whether it was going to reverse the way things reversed when authority pushed back. When the room decided it was easier to let the familiar version of events proceed. Marcus held her gaze. He did not smile. He did not give her the performance of reassurance. He gave her something more honest, which was the simple physical fact of not moving. He was still here. Scout was still here. The door was still held. "You're okay right now," he said. "Nothing's happening yet." Ava looked at Scout. Scout looked at her, amber eyes steady, unhurried, carrying nothing except the complete attention of an animal that had decided this was where it needed to be and was not reconsidering. Ava's breathing slowed by 1 degree. She kept her hand in Scout's fur. Across the lobby, Karen Voss stood with her organized paperwork and her immaculate uniform and her 4 months of documented guardianship and her explanation for every difficult thing, and she watched a Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd and a 6-year-old girl, and her jaw held its precise tension, and her eyes did not leave Marcus. And the particular quality of her attention was the attention of someone calculating the distance between where things were and where they were supposed to be. She had walked into this lobby expecting a room that would accommodate her. It was not accommodating her. That had not happened before. Outside, the snow kept coming down on Copper Falls. Inside, Under the fluorescent lights, a child who had run through it with one boot missing sat against a German shepherd and waited to find out whether this was finally the room where the truth was going to be allowed to stay. Diane Cho arrived at 11:43 p.m., 46 minutes after Garrett made the call. She was 44 years old, compact and unhurried, wearing the expression of someone who had driven through Wisconsin winters to difficult situations so many times that the snow no longer registered as an obstacle, only as information. She came in through the front doors with a shoulder bag and a tablet, and the specific calm of a person who had learned that the most useful thing she could bring into a room was her own steadiness. She looked at the lobby, took in Marcus and Scout and Ava still positioned together near the far wall, looked at Karen standing near the desk with her organized folder, and said nothing for a full 5 seconds. Then she looked at DuPont. "Walk me through it." DuPont walked her through it. He was precise and economical, the way experienced officers were when they understood a situation had weight and did not want to contaminate it with interpretation. He described the sequence of arrival, Scout's behavioral response, the child's statements, Karen's documentation, his decision to hold. Diane listened without interrupting. Her eyes moved to Ava once while DuPont was talking, the specific kind of look that child welfare professionals develop over years of work, not assessing damage, reading the person underneath it. When DuPont finished, Diane said, "I need to see the original placement file, not copies, the county file." Karen said, "I have all the documentation here." She opened the folder with the ease of someone who had prepared for exactly this request. Approval letter, placement authorization, medical release, emergency contact protocol. Everything is in order. Diane did not reach for the folder. "The county file," she said again, "not what you brought." Karen's expression held. "The county office is closed." "I know," Diane said. "I'll have it by 7 a.m. Until then, nobody goes anywhere." She looked at Ava. "Is there somewhere she can sit that's not the lobby?" DuPont led them to a small side office, the kind used for informal interviews, with a table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out on the parking lot. Marcus brought Scout. Ava walked between them, one hand in Scout's fur, not gripping now, just resting. The contact of a child who needed the anchor, but no longer needed to hold on for survival. Karen said, "I should be present." "You can wait in the lobby," Diane said. The statement was not negotiated. Karen waited in the lobby. In the side office, Diane sat across from Ava at the table, while Marcus stayed near the door, Scout at his feet. Diane did not immediately ask questions. She took out a small sketch pad and a set of colored pencils from her bag and set them on the table without comment, the way experienced practitioners offered children tools rather than demands. Ava looked at the pencils for a moment, then reached for the brown one. "Do you like dogs?" Diane asked. "Yes," Ava said. She was drawing already, her hand moving with the focused certainty of a child who had been using drawing to process things for longer than most people around her realized. "Scout is a good one," Diane said. "He has amber eyes," Ava said. She said it the way children stated facts that mattered to them, as information the world needed to have. "Like the color of honey, but darker." Marcus looked at Scout. Scout's amber eyes were tracking Diane with the calm, evaluating attention he gave to new people. He had decided she was not a threat within 2 minutes of her arrival, which Marcus had noted and filed. "Ava," Diane said, "can you tell me about where you sleep?" A pause. Ava kept drawing. "At Karen's house." "Do you have your own room?" "Yes." She did not look up. "It has a yellow door." "Do you like your room?" The pencil slowed. "In the day," Ava said. Diane waited. She was the kind of person who understood that silence, handled correctly, was not empty. It was an invitation. "At night," Ava said, "the door locks." She said it simply, the way children stated facts they had accepted as the normal shape of the world. "From outside." Marcus's jaw tightened. He kept his face neutral. He had been keeping it neutral for 40 minutes, and it was getting harder. "When does it lock?" Diane asked. "When I cry," Ava said. She looked up for the first time, directly at Diane, with eyes that were not asking for comfort, but for confirmation that the words meant what she thought they meant. "She says I'm bad when I cry. She turns off the hallway light, and it's really dark, and I can't hear anything, and I have to be quiet until morning." The room was completely still. Diane wrote something on her tablet. Her expression had not changed. It was the professional composure of someone whose job required her to hear terrible things without collapsing the space that the person saying them needed in order to keep saying them. But her eyes, when she looked up from the tablet, carried something that composure could not fully cover. "How many times has that happened?" Diane asked. Ava thought about it with the seriousness of a child doing math. "A lot," she said. She paused. "I tried not to cry. I got better at it." She looked at Scout. "She doesn't know about the counting." "What counting?" Marcus asked. He had not planned to speak. The question came out before the decision to ask it. Ava looked at him. "I count to make the dark smaller," she said. "I count to 100, and then I start again. I got to 1,000 once." She said it without drama, without wanting him to understand how large 1,000 was in the dark at 6 years old. She was just reporting. "Scout doesn't need to count." Marcus looked at the dog, who had moved, at some point in the last few minutes, from his position by the door to the chair beside Ava, where he sat with his chin resting on the edge of the table, amber eyes on the child's face. Ava had not called him. He had simply arrived at the place where he needed to be, which was the thing Scout did, which was the thing Marcus had stopped trying to fully explain. Diane closed the tablet cover. "You did a very good thing tonight," she said, "coming here." Ava looked at the drawing in front of her. It was Scout, recognizable, amber eyes correctly colored, ears at exactly the angle they were at right now. "I waited until she was on the phone," Ava said. "She talks loud on the phone. I took my boots from the mat." A pause. "I dropped one on the steps. I didn't go back." The decision in that last sentence was enormous. Marcus felt the weight of it. The calculation a 6-year-old had made, in the dark, at the top of a staircase in the cold. The one boot or the door, and had chosen the door. Outside the office, in the lobby, DuPont was having a different conversation. He had pulled Karen Voss's personnel file at 11:15, before Diane arrived, with the specific impulse of a man who trusted experience over paperwork and had learned that the two were often not the same thing. Karen's file was clean. 3 commendations in 12 years. Positive performance evaluations. Community volunteer hours logged with care. On paper, she was the person her paperwork said she was. But DuPont had been reading files for 30 years, and he had learned that the most important information in a file was not always what was in it. Sometimes it was what wasn't. There were 2 complaint notations marked resolved from the previous 3 years, both from sources outside the department. Both resolved internally without independent review. Both with no follow-up documentation attached. The resolutions were words, not process, not outcome. Just the word resolved, applied like a lid over whatever had been said underneath it. He looked at Karen, sitting in the lobby with her folder and her correct posture, checking her phone at intervals with the specific rhythm of someone waiting for a message that was taking too long to come. He thought about what it meant that she had walked into a police station expecting to retrieve a child who had run to a stranger in the snow. He thought about the confidence required for that walk, the certainty that the room would accommodate the request. He went to his office and made a second call. Not to the county office. To a colleague in family court services who owed him a favor and kept late hours. In the lobby, Garrett was watching Karen watch her phone. He was 26 years old and had been on the force for 14 months and had not yet developed the specific skill of appearing to be doing something other than what he was actually doing, which was paying attention to the thing in the room that did not fit. Karen glanced at him once, and he looked away. She returned to her phone. At 12:30 a.m., Garrett's desk phone rang. He answered, listened, and looked up at DuPont's office. "Sergeant," he called, "family court line." DuPont came out. He took the call at the desk, his back to Karen, his voice too low for her to hear. He listened for 4 minutes. He wrote 2 things on a notepad, tore the page off, and put it in his breast pocket. When he hung up and turned around, Karen was watching him. "What was that?" she asked. "Routine," DuPont said. It was not routine. The family court contact had told him about a prior placement. A 7-year-old boy named Theo. A social worker named Bettina Farr, who had filed a welfare concern 8 months ago. A concern that had been handled internally by Karen's supervisor and marked resolved without forwarding to the county office. A supervisor who had since retired. DuPont stood in the lobby and looked at Karen Voss with the expression of a man who had just understood something he had not wanted to understand. He said nothing. He went back to his office and closed the door, and sat with what he knew and what he still needed to prove, and the specific weight of the distance between those two things. Marcus came out of the side office at 12:50, leaving Diane with Ava, who had fallen asleep against Scout's flank on the interview bench, her drawing still in her hand. He found DuPont in the hallway. "How are we doing?" he asked. DuPont looked at him. "Tell me about the bruise," he said. "Left wrist," Marcus said. "Yellow and green at the edges. 8 to 10 days old. Finger-shaped. 4 distinct marks and a partial thumb." He paused. "I saw it when she reached up to hold on to Scout, before I knew who Voss was." DuPont wrote it down. "Your dog. The response to Voss. That's consistent in your professional assessment." "Scout flags threat indicators," Marcus said. "He doesn't interpret them. I interpret them. In my assessment, his response to Voss was consistent with a stress-threat response, not a general environment response. He was specific." "You'd testify to that." "I'd testify to what I observed," Marcus said. "The dog's behavior is documentable. I can provide the behavioral indicators in writing with training certification context." DuPont looked at the closed lobby door. Through the glass panel, Karen was visible, still sitting, still precise. "She's going to push hard in the morning," he said. "She's got 12 years and clean paper and a county authorization. The department is going to want to close this." "The department," Marcus said, "is going to have to explain why a canine with a documented stress response record flagged its own officer." He held DuPont's gaze. "That is not a small thing to explain away." DuPont was quiet for a moment. "You should know she's not just a foster parent," he said. "She's one of ours. 12 years. The department is going to want to close this quietly." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I'm not leaving tonight." DuPont looked at him. He looked at the uniform, the digital camouflage, the man who had come in for 20 minutes of paperwork and was now standing in a hallway at 1 a.m. because a child had run to his dog in the snow. "You have orders," he said. "Not an accusation, a fact." "Yes," Marcus said. "Flight in the morning." "There's a later one," Marcus said. He did not elaborate. He had checked while Diane was talking to Ava, the same way he had checked Brennan's record when he needed to know whether the source was clean. The same way he ran every variable he could run before the situation required him to act on incomplete information. There was a flight at 4 p.m. It was enough. DuPont put the notepad in his pocket. He looked at the lobby door one more time, at Karen Voss, sitting with her organized folder and her correct posture and her 12 years and her clean paper. And he thought about the word resolved, applied twice over complaints that had never been independently reviewed. "I'm going to need Bettina Farr's contact information," he said. "I don't have it," Marcus said. "No," DuPont said, "but I do." He started toward his office. "Get some coffee. This is going to take until morning." Marcus went back to the side office. Ava was still asleep against Scout, her hand still resting on the drawing. Diane was sitting across from them, making notes, her tablet screen the only light in the room. She looked up when Marcus came in. "She's stable," Diane said quietly. "Physically, she's okay. The bruise needs to be formally documented by a medical professional, but it can wait until morning." She looked at Ava. "She's been holding this by herself for a long time." "I know," Marcus said. "She counted to 1,000, Diane said. She said it the way people say things that are too large for the container of a single sentence. She looked at Marcus. "She counted to 1,000 in the dark, and then she ran." Marcus looked at the sleeping child, at the drawing in her hand, at Scout's chin resting on her back, rising and falling with her breathing. He thought about what it had taken to get from that locked room to this moment. The calculation at the top of the stairs. The one boot. The decision to trust a dog she had never met, in a building she had never been inside, because something in her had understood that certain things were safe before she had the language to explain why. She had counted to 1,000, and then she had run toward the right thing. Whatever happened in the morning, whatever Karen's paperwork said, and whatever the department wanted to close, that child had made the hardest decision a 6-year-old could make, and made it correctly. Marcus sat down. Scout opened one amber eye, registered him, and closed it again. Outside, the snow kept falling on Copper Falls. Inside, the night was not finished yet. But something had shifted in the last 4 hours that could not be unshifted. A child had spoken. The words were in the room now, and words, once spoken to people who wrote them down, had a way of refusing to disappear. Bettina Farr answered on the second ring. It was 2:15 in the morning. DuPont had not expected her to answer at all. He had prepared to leave a message, planned what the message would say, rehearsed the careful language that did not alarm but conveyed urgency. Instead, she picked up immediately, as if she had been waiting beside the phone for 8 months for exactly this call. "Ray DuPont," he said. "Copper Falls PD. I'm sorry for the hour." "Don't be," Bettina said. Her voice was the voice of someone who had not been asleep. "I've been waiting for someone from that department to call me for 8 months. 2 in the morning is fine." DuPont closed his office door. "Tell me about Theo," he said. Bettina told him. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping. Her account was specific and detailed and organized with the precision of someone who had been composing it in her head since the day her complaint was returned to her, marked resolved. And she had understood that the system had decided the complaint was a problem to be managed rather than a truth to be acted on. She described what she had observed during a routine home visit. The boy's posture, the specific flinch when Karen moved toward him too quickly, the bruise she had documented with photographs, photographs she still had, photographs that had been requested as part of her complaint and then never followed up on. She described the phone call she received from Karen's supervisor, a man named Lieutenant Graves, who had retired 6 months ago, telling her the matter had been internally reviewed and found unsubstantiated. She described the transfer that moved Theo to a different placement 3 weeks later, a transfer she had not requested and had not been consulted about. "I asked for a copy of the internal review," she said. "I was told it was administrative and not available to external parties." A pause. "I filed a second complaint, with the county office directly. I received an acknowledgement letter and no follow-up." DuPont was writing. He had stopped writing halfway through and started recording on his desk phone. "The photographs," he said. "You still have them?" "I have everything," Bettina said. "I have copies of every document, every email, every notation I made from the day of the original visit. I kept them because I knew this was not over." Her voice tightened slightly. "Where is Theo now?" "Green Bay," DuPont said. "New placement. Doing okay from what I understand." "And the girl? Ava?" "She's here," DuPont said. "She's safe tonight." A pause on the line. When Bettina spoke again, her voice had changed by one precise degree. "I'll be in Copper Falls by 7 a.m., she said. "I'm bringing everything I have." DuPont said, "I'll have coffee ready." He hung up and sat in his office with a recording running back in his head, with the word "resolved" sitting in the center of his mind like a stone. And he thought about Karen Voss in the lobby with her organized folder, and her 12 years, and her practiced composure, and her ability to walk into a room full of people and make them feel that everything was under control. He thought about what it meant that 2 children had been in her care, that 2 complaints had been filed, that both had been resolved without independent review, that the person handling both resolutions had retired without ceremony 6 months ago. He thought about the word pattern and the weight it carried when you said it in a courtroom. At 3 a.m., Garrett knocked on his door. "Sir, you need to see this." DuPont came out. Garrett had his computer screen turned toward the hallway. On it was a security camera still, pulled from Karen's home system, obtained via an emergency warrant that DuPont had requested at midnight through the county judge's after-hours line. A warrant he had not told Karen about, had not told anyone about except the judge and the DA's on-call investigator, whose name was Loretta Haynes, and who had called him back in 11 minutes and said, "Issue it." The still showed a door, interior, a hallway, a door with a lock on the outside, the kind of lock that did not belong on that side of a door in a home where a child slept. Garrett did not say anything. He did not need to. DuPont looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he said, "Print it." In the side office, Marcus was awake when Diane came in at 3:30. Scout was still positioned beside Ava on the bench, the child still asleep, the drawing still in her hand. Diane sat across from Marcus and put her tablet on the table and looked at him with the direct attention of someone who was about to say something that required the other person to be fully present. "There's a prior placement," she said. "I know," Marcus said. "DuPont told me. A boy named Theo, 7 years old. A complaint filed by a social worker that was buried internally." She paused. "I've been in contact with the county office through their emergency line. They're pulling everything they have on Karen Voss's placement history, going back 6 years." She met his eyes. "There may be a third child." Marcus said nothing. He looked at Ava sleeping against Scout and felt the cold fact of that settle into the specific place where he kept things that had no adequate response. "She came to you," Diane said. She was not making a point. She was stating something she needed to say out loud. In a building full of officers, she ran to a stranger in a Navy uniform and a dog she had never seen. She made that calculation in under 10 seconds. "She made it correctly," Marcus said. "Yes," Diane said. "She did." She looked at the drawing in Ava's hand. Kids like her develop a very accurate sensor for who is safe and who isn't. It gets calibrated by experience. A pause. The fact that she trusted Scout immediately means she has been around dogs that did not hurt her. Somewhere in her history, There was a good dog. She remembered what that felt like. Marcus looked at Scout. The dog's amber eyes were half open, monitoring the room with the low-level awareness of an animal that was resting but not off duty. "He knew before I did," Marcus said. When Karen came through the door, his response was immediate. "I know," Diane said. "I'm going to need a formal written account of his behavioral response. Specific indicators, sequence, duration. It becomes part of the record." "You'll have it before 7, Marcus said. Diane nodded. She stood to leave and then stopped. "You had a flight," she said. "There's another one," Marcus said. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone filing information for later. Then she left, and Marcus pulled out his phone and started writing the behavioral account with the careful precision of someone who understood that the words he chose right now would matter in a room he might never see. Karen's composure broke at 5:47 a.m. It did not break dramatically. It broke the way composure breaks when the specific architecture holding it together loses one load-bearing piece too many. DuPont had come into the lobby at 5:30 with the security camera still in a clear plastic folder and placed it on the table in front of her without speaking. She looked at it. She looked at the lock and the outside of the door. She looked at DuPont. "That's a privacy lock," she said. "For my own security." "On the outside of a child's bedroom door," DuPont said. "It's not her bedroom," Karen said. "The county file will show where her bedroom is," DuPont said. "Bettina Farr arrives in an hour. She's bringing photographs from a prior placement." He looked at Karen steadily. "I'm going to give you the next 60 minutes to make a decision about how you want to handle what happens next." Karen looked at the folder. Her jaw was working beneath the surface of her composure. Her hands, which had been still all night, moved to her lap. "You're making a mistake," she said. Her voice was lower now, less polished, the voice underneath the performance. "I have given that child more structure and stability than any other placement she's had. You have no idea what she was like when she came to me." "I know what she was like when she came in here," DuPont said. "She's manipulative," Karen said. The word landed wrong, and she knew it the moment she said it. Knew it from the specific quality of silence it produced in the room. Children in her situation learn to perform distress. It's a survival mechanism. I've documented it. "You've documented it," DuPont said, "in your own records, that you control, that I was required to maintain under county guidelines," Karen said. Her voice had risen by half an octave. "I followed every protocol. I did everything that was asked of me." "You locked a 6-year-old in the dark," DuPont said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They were the end of the conversation, dressed up as the middle of it. And everyone in the room understood that, including Karen. She stopped talking. Marcus came into the lobby at 6:15. He had the behavioral account printed and in a folder. He handed it to DuPont, nodded at Carrot, and looked at Karen Voss across the lobby with the same unhurried attention he had given her the night before. She looked back at him. Something in her face had changed. The arranged concern gone entirely. The composure worn down to something raw and less managed. She looked like a person who had run out of versions of the story. "Your dog," she said. Her voice was the voice of someone genuinely trying to understand something that had been outside her accounting. "You walked in here for paperwork. How did you know to stay?" Marcus looked at Scout, who was at his left side, amber eyes forward. "I didn't," he said. "He did." He paused. "I trusted him." Karen looked at Scout with an expression that had nothing in it except the specific exhaustion of a person who has just understood that the thing that undid them was not a detective or a warrant or a determined social worker. It was a dog who had read her correctly in under 30 seconds, and a man who had believed the dog. Bettina Farr arrived at 6:58, 2 minutes before her own estimate, with a weathered canvas bag and the expression of someone who had been right for 8 months, and had paid a cost for being right, that was not yet finished being paid. She was 49, heavy-set, wearing reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she set the canvas bag on DuPont's conference table, with the specific weight of someone depositing evidence that had been waiting for a proper home. She unpacked photographs, documents, a handwritten journal of observations dated over 6 months, emails, the letter from Lieutenant Graves telling her the complaint was resolved, her own response to that letter, which she had sent and which had never been acknowledged. She looked at DuPont. "I want to see the child," she said. DuPont brought her to the side office. Ava was awake, sitting at the table with Scout, working on a second drawing. She looked up when Bettina came in and assessed her with the rapid accuracy that had become the most reliable instrument in her possession. And then she looked at Scout, who had turned his head toward Bettina and held it there, and then looked back at Ava with the ease of an animal that had decided the newcomer was fine. Ava reached for a yellow pencil. "You can sit down," she said. Bettina sat down. "I like your bag," Ava said. Bettina looked at the canvas bag. "Thank you. I've had it a long time." "It looks strong," Ava said. "It is," Bettina said. Ava went back to her drawing. Scout shifted slightly, so his side was pressed against her chair. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something that has been wrong for a long time is finally in the process of being corrected. Slowly and imperfectly, and without ceremony, but being corrected nonetheless. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched. He thought about the flight at 4 p.m. and the base expecting him, and the deployment cycle beginning in 11 days. He thought about the paperwork he had come in for last night, and the 20 minutes he had planned to spend. He thought about a 6-year-old who had counted to 1,000 in the dark, and then made a decision about which door to run toward. He thought about Scout, who had known in under 30 seconds. He thought about the specific thing that happened when the right person stayed in the right room long enough for the truth to find a surface to land on. Loretta Haynes arrived at 7:15 with the specific energy of a DA's investigator who had been awake since midnight and was running on the specific fuel of a case that had shape. She looked at Bettina's documents for 40 minutes and then looked at DuPont and said, "I need Karen Voss in a formal interview room, now." DuPont said, "She's in the lobby." "Not anymore," Loretta said. The lobby was empty. Karen's organized folder was still on the table. Her coffee cup was still there. Her coat was gone. Garrett looked at the front door. "She left 4 minutes ago," he said. His voice was the voice of someone who had been watching and had not understood what he was watching until it was no longer there to watch. DuPont was already on the radio. Marcus looked at Scout. Scout was looking at the front door with the alert, forward attention of an animal that understood what leaving in that particular way meant. "She ran," Garrett said. "Yes," Marcus said. He looked at DuPont. "The county line, the eastern approach. She drove a dark blue sedan." DuPont did not ask how he knew which direction. He relayed it. The patrol unit found Karen Voss 7 minutes later, 2 miles east on the county road. Her car pulled to the shoulder, engine running, hands on the wheel, not going anywhere. She had not been running. She had been deciding between 2 versions of what came next, and she had run out of time to choose. She was brought back to the station. She was placed in the interview room. Her badge was taken by DuPont personally, who held it for a moment before placing it on the table between them, and the gesture did not require explanation. Outside the interview room, in the hallway, Ava sat on the bench with Scout and finished her drawing. She held it up when Marcus walked past. It was the lobby, the front doors, a small figure with dark hair running through them. And in the middle of the room, a man in green and brown, and a dog with amber eyes. And they were not moving. They were just there, standing still, waiting. "That's you," Ava said. "And Scout." She looked at the drawing. "You didn't move." "No," Marcus said. "That's why it worked," she said simply. She handed him the drawing. Then she looked at Scout, who had leaned his weight against her leg with the quiet certainty of an animal that had found its purpose for the day and was not going anywhere until the day was done. Loretta Haynes was in the interview room with Karen Voss for 90 minutes. Marcus did not hear what was said inside. Nobody did, except the recording equipment and Loretta, who came out at 9:40 with the expression of someone who had received exactly what she expected and found it more than sufficient. She stood in the hallway, looked at her notes for 30 seconds, and then looked at DuPont. "She's going to claim structure-based discipline," she said. "She's going to say the locking was therapeutic containment for a child with documented behavioral dysregulation. She has a term for it. She's been preparing this for a while." "Will it hold?" DuPont asked. "Against Bettina Farr's photographs and that security camera still, and the medical record gaps, and a second complainant, and a child who described specific incidents in specific sequence to a licensed child welfare professional?" Loretta looked at him directly. "No, it will not hold." She closed her notebook. "But it tells us she planned for this. Not for last night specifically, for the possibility of last night. She had an answer ready." DuPont absorbed that, the premeditation in it, the specific cold calculation of someone who had thought through the defense before the accusation arrived. "How long?" he said. "The gap between Theo and Ava is 8 months, Loretta said. "She wasn't idle in those 8 months. She was preparing." A beat. "The third child, the one the county office may have. If that comes back confirmed, the premeditation argument becomes significantly stronger." DuPont looked at the closed interview room door. "She's been doing this a long time," he said, not a question. "She's been not getting caught a long time," Loretta said. "Those are different things." She picked up her bag. "I'll have the formal charge recommendation to the DA by noon. Badge and weapons stay here. She doesn't go home." She paused. "The department is going to want to manage the narrative. Prepare for that." DuPont said, "The department can manage whatever it wants after the child is protected." Loretta looked at him with a brief, specific expression that was not quite admiration, but existed in its vicinity. Then she went back into the interview room. Marcus was in the break room when Garrett found him at 10:15. Garrett was carrying a printout, and his expression was the expression of someone who had been awake all night and had just found the thing that explained everything and was not sure how to say it. He handed the printout to Marcus without speaking. It was a county placement registry entry. Karen Voss. Approved foster placement status. Active. 3 prior placements listed. The third child was named Lily, 5 years old. Placement period, 14 months, ending 3 years ago. Termination reason, child requested transfer. The transfer had been processed by Lieutenant Graves, the same man who had handled the first complaint, the same man who had retired 6 months ago. Marcus read the entry twice. "How old was she?" he said. 4 when she went in, Garrett said. 5 when she left. A 4-year-old had requested a transfer? Which meant a 4-year-old had said something to someone that was specific and credible enough to produce action. And that action had been a transfer instead of an investigation. Which meant the system had heard the truth and had chosen the path of least institutional disruption. "Has Loretta seen this?" "I'm taking it in now," Garrett said. "Give it to DuPont first," Marcus said. "He needs to know before it goes into the interview." Garrett went. Marcus stood in the break room with his coffee and thought about three children. Different ages, different years, the same locked door, the same dark. He thought about the specific patience required to do what Karen had done for as long as she had done it. The calculation involved, the management of exposure, the 12 years of clean performance evaluations and community volunteer hours logged with care. The armor built so thoroughly that a welfare complaint filed by a trained social worker could be routed through a single supervisor and returned resolved, without a mark. He thought about what had interrupted that. Not a detective, not an investigation. A 6-year-old who had counted to 1,000 and then run through the snow without one boot and wrapped her arms around a dog she had never met. Scout came into the break room. He had been with Ava in the side office, but Diane had taken Ava to a different room for a formal recorded interview, and Scout had apparently decided that Marcus needed monitoring. He sat beside the chair and looked up at Marcus with his amber eyes, patient and complete. 3 kids, Marcus said to the dog. Scout held his gaze. You knew in 30 seconds, Marcus said. She walked through that door and you knew. Scout did not respond to this in any demonstrable way. He simply maintained the specific quality of attention he gave to things he had decided mattered. Steady and present, and entirely without judgment about why it had taken the humans in the room so much longer than 30 seconds to arrive at the same conclusion. At 11 a.m., the county office called with confirmation of Lily's placement history, and a second piece of information that changed the shape of the morning again. Lily was now 8 years old. She was living with her maternal grandmother in Ashland, Wisconsin. She had been in weekly therapy for 2 years. Her therapist, a licensed clinical social worker named Dr. Marla Price, had filed a mandated report 18 months ago, describing specific disclosures Lily had made in session about her time in foster care. The report had been submitted to the county. It had been acknowledged. There was no follow-up in the file. The acknowledgement letter had been processed by the same county intake coordinator who had processed Karen's placement approvals. Loretta took the phone call standing in the hallway. Marcus watched her face during the call, which lasted 4 minutes. When she hung up, she said, to no one in particular, "The intake coordinator." She said it the way people say something when the shape of a thing has just become completely visible for the first time. The intake coordinator has been approving Karen's placements for 6 years. She looked at DuPont. Run her. DuPont ran the name. It came back clean on the surface, which was where surfaces were most useful for people who understood how surfaces worked. But Loretta was already calling the state oversight office, bypassing the county entirely, with the focused energy of someone who had just understood that the problem was not limited to one officer and one supervisor who had retired. There's a second layer, she said to DuPont. Karen didn't just manage the complaints internally. She had someone managing what reached the county level. She paused. This is not a placement problem. This is a network. DuPont sat down, not because he was tired, because the full weight of what he was holding required a chair. 12 years, 3 children that they knew of, probably more. 2 points of protection inside the system, 1 departmental, 1 external. A structure designed to absorb complaints and return them neutralized. And underlying all of it, 3 children who had said something true to someone and had been transferred, resolved, acknowledged, without action. Until a 6-year-old ran through snow to a Navy SEAL's dog at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in January, and the dog did not move. Marcus came and sat across from him. They did not speak for a moment. DuPont looked at the ceiling, and then at the printout of Lily's placement record, and then at Marcus. How do you do it? He said. The things you've seen. How do you put it down at the end? Marcus looked at Scout, who was lying at his feet. Some things you don't put down, he said. You carry them differently. He paused. But you keep moving. DuPont nodded. He picked up the phone and started making calls. The next 4 hours were the specific kind of productive that looked like nothing from the outside and was everything from the inside. Loretta coordinated with the State Oversight Office. Bettina Farr sat in the conference room and worked through her documentation with a state investigator who had driven up from Madison. Diane completed Ava's formal interview and filed the preliminary protective assessment with recommendations that were clear and specific and left no room for internal management. The county intake coordinator was placed on administrative hold pending review, a phrase that sounded procedural and meant something has been found and cannot be unfound. Karen Voss was formally charged at 2:15 p.m. Unlawful imprisonment of a minor, pattern of child abuse, obstruction of a mandated reporting process. The formal reading of the charges was done by Loretta in the interview room, and DuPont stood outside the closed door and listened to the silence on the other side of it. The silence of a person who had run out of prepared answers. Marcus was in the side office with Ava when it happened. He did not tell her. She did not ask. She was working on a drawing that had taken her most of the morning, and she was adding the final detail when the formal charges were being read 2 rooms away. And the final detail was a door, and the door was open, and the light on the other side of it was yellow. She held it up. "That's my room," she said. "The one I want." Marcus looked at it. The yellow door, open, the light coming through. "It's a good room," he said. "It doesn't have a lock," she said. She said it with the specific, matter-of-fact certainty of a child who has decided what the non-negotiable things are and is not apologizing for the list. "Any room I live in can't have a lock on the outside." "That's a reasonable requirement," Marcus said. She looked at him with the evaluating attention that had not left her since the night before. "Will someone make sure?" "Diane will make sure," Marcus said. "And it'll be in writing." Ava looked at Scout. Scout looked at Ava. The mutual understanding between them was the kind that did not require translation. She reached out and put her hand on his head, and he leaned into it with the uncomplicated trust of an animal that had decided a long time ago where the safe things were. DuPont appeared in the doorway at 2:30. He looked at Marcus. "She's been charged," he said. "The State Oversight Office has opened a formal investigation into the intake coordinator. The county has suspended the placement registry pending audit." He paused. "They're looking for Lily's family. And Theo." Marcus nodded. "Your flight," DuPont said. 4 p.m., Marcus said. He checked his watch. "I have time." DuPont came into the room and crouched in front of Ava with the careful movement of a man who had spent 30 years maintaining the posture of authority and was temporarily setting it down. "Hey," he said. "You're going to go somewhere safe tonight, with people who know about you. And nobody is going to lock any doors." Ava looked at him. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Scout. Then she looked at her drawing of the yellow door and the open light. And she folded it carefully and held it in both hands. "Okay," she said. The word was small. It was also the largest thing in the room. At 3:15, Diane arrived with Tom and Margaret Sell, the emergency placement family, who had driven 40 minutes through January, Wisconsin, because Diane had called them at 7 a.m., and they had said yes before she finished asking. Margaret was a woman in her 50s, with warm hands and the expression of a person who had been doing this for 20 years, because she understood that some children needed someone to simply be present while the world reorganized itself around them. She sat down beside Ava without introduction and said, "I heard you like dogs." Ava looked at her. "Yes." "We have 2, Margaret said. "One is young and loud, one is old and very calm. You can decide which one to sit with." Ava thought about it seriously. "The calm one," she said. For now. Margaret nodded like that was a perfectly sensible answer, which it was. Tom stood near the door and nodded at Marcus with the recognition of one person seeing another person clearly across the specific space of a situation that had required them both to do something that cost them something. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Marcus knelt in front of Ava one last time. She looked at him with the steady, accurate gaze that had been her most reliable instrument since the night before. "I have to go soon," he said. "But Diane is going to be here, and Tom and Margaret are here, and Scout is going to stay until you leave." Ava looked at Scout. "He's staying?" "Until you go," Marcus said. She reached out and put both hands on Scout's face. Amber eyes to amber eyes. The specific communication between two entities that had recognized each other correctly in the dark. "Thank you," she said to the dog. In the direct, unelaborated way, she said everything that mattered. "For staying still." Scout pressed his forehead against her hands. Outside, January was releasing its grip by one cold degree. And somewhere in the Copper Falls Police Department, the charges were in the system, and the doors were being looked at differently. And 3 children, who had said something true to someone who had the power to act on it, were going to have that truth become a record that could not be returned to resolved. Marcus picked up his duffel at 3:45. The drawings were inside it, both of them, folded with the care of things that mattered. He said goodbye to DuPont with a handshake that held a moment longer than handshakes usually did. He said goodbye to Bettina Farr, who looked at him with the expression of someone who had been in a long, exhausting fight and had just found out they were not the only one who had been fighting it. He said goodbye to Garrett, who was still at the desk, still awake, carrying the specific expression of someone whose understanding of his job had been permanently revised. Scout walked beside him out of the building. The air was cold, and the parking lot was white, and the January sky was the particular gray of a day that had done heavy work and was not yet finished. Marcus opened the truck door. Scout jumped in. Marcus sat behind the wheel and looked at the police department building one more time. And then he started the engine and drove toward the airport and thought about a child who had counted to 1,000 in the dark and had decided that one boot was less important than the door. He had been in the building for 17 hours. He had come in for 20 minutes of paperwork. He had not left because Scout had not moved. And Marcus had learned long ago that when Scout did not move, neither did he. The truck turned onto the highway. Behind him, Copper Falls went back to its January business, quieter in ways that were not yet visible, but would be. The slow, structural quiet of a system that had been interrupted at a load-bearing point and would have to rebuild around the correction. The 4 p.m. flight was on time. Marcus was in his seat with 7 minutes to spare. He took the drawings out of his duffel and held them for a moment. The lobby with the man in green and brown and the dog with amber eyes. The yellow door with the light on the other side. He looked at them for a long time. Then he put them carefully back in the duffel, in the inside pocket where he kept the things that were going to stay with him, regardless of what came next. The plane lifted off over Wisconsin, and the snow was white below and the sky was gray above. And somewhere in Copper Falls, a 6-year-old named Ava was sitting between 2 dogs in a house where none of the doors locked from the outside, and the hallway light was on. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Spring came to Copper Falls the way spring came to Wisconsin, reluctantly, in increments, as if the cold had to be convinced to release its grip 1 degree at a time. The snow retreated from the edges of things first. The south-facing slopes, the pavement near buildings that held heat, then slowly from the open spaces, revealing the dark earth underneath that had been waiting all winter to be seen again. Ava had been with Tom and Margaret Sell for 3 months when the first crocus came up in Margaret's backyard. She found it on a Tuesday morning before school, the small purple head pushing through the last thin crust of snow at the base of the fence, and she stood over it for a long time without touching it. Tom watched from the kitchen window. He did not go out. He had learned in 3 months that Ava needed to encounter things in her own time, that rushing her toward wonder was the same as rushing her toward anything else, which was to say, it did not work, and was not necessary. She would get there. She always got there. She got there in about 4 minutes. She crouched down, looked at the crocus at eye level, and said something to it that Tom could not hear through the glass. Then she stood up and came inside and said, "There's a flower. It came up by itself." "They do that," Tom said. "Even with the snow on top of it?" "Especially then," he said. "They push through." Ava thought about that for a moment, with the serious, unhurried consideration she brought to things that mattered. Then she went to get her backpack and went to school. Margaret told Diane Cho about the crocus on their weekly call. Diane wrote it in her notes, not as a data point, but as a marker, the specific kind of small thing that told you where a child was in the process of rebuilding their understanding of what was reliable. A flower that pushed through snow without anyone telling it to. Ava had recognized something in that. It was worth noting. The formal case against Karen Voss had moved through the system with the specific, unglamorous momentum of a well-documented prosecution. Loretta Haynes had built the case the way she built everything, methodically, without drama, with the patient accumulation of evidence that left no procedural gap for a skilled defense attorney to insert doubt into. The state oversight investigation had confirmed what Loretta suspected about the county intake coordinator, whose name was Sandra Welk, and whose connection to Karen turned out to be a personal one. A friendship of 11 years. A favor done once that became the architecture of silence around a pattern of harm. Sandra Welk had resigned before the formal charges reached her. The resignation had not stopped the charges. They had followed her. The department's internal review had produced changes that were not announced with press conferences and were not reported in the local paper with the prominence they deserved. New protocols for handling complaints involving officers with foster care relationships. Mandatory independent review for any welfare complaint flagged against department personnel. Direct county notification as the default, not the exception. The changes were written in careful institutional language that did not fully convey the weight of what had made them necessary. But they were written. And the people who would process the next complaint knew what had happened the last time someone decided to handle it quietly. Garrett had been the one to write the first draft of the new complaint protocol. DuPont had asked him to, which surprised Garrett, and DuPont had said, "You were awake all night, watching the right thing happen for the wrong reasons. You understand what the gap is better than I do." Garrett had taken that seriously. The draft was thorough. It was also the thing that would outlast everyone in the room by decades. DuPont retired in April. He did not make a speech. He sat in his office on his last morning and looked at the photograph of Karen's locked door, which he had kept in his desk drawer, not as a reminder of failure, but as a reminder of the specific distance between what a file said and what was true. And he thought about 30 years of reading files, and the 2 complaint notations marked "resolved," and the word that had done so much damage with so few letters. Then he put the photograph in the shredder, because it was in the official case file where it needed to be, and he did not need his own copy of it anymore. He left his key on his desk and walked out into the April morning and did not look back. He said one thing to Garrett on the way out. "The dog was right in 30 seconds, he said. "Keep that." Garrett kept it. Bettina Farr received a formal written acknowledgement from the county office in March. It was not an apology. It stated, in careful administrative language, that her 2022 complaint regarding a prior placement had been improperly handled, and that the procedural failure had been identified and corrected. Bettina read it 3 times. Then she called Diane Cho. "Is this what accountability looks like?" she said. "Sometimes," Diane said. "It's more than there was before." "More than there was before," Bettina said. She turned the phrase over. "I can work with that." Theo was contacted through his foster family in Green Bay. He was 8 years old and had a new dog, a rescue beagle named Frank. And when the caseworker visited, he spent most of the visit on the floor with Frank and answered questions from that position, which the caseworker noted as a healthy indicator and not a behavioral problem, which was itself a sign that the caseworker was the right person for the job. Theo did not want to talk about the locked door. He did not have to. His disclosures were not required for the prosecution. What he had said to Bettina 3 years ago was already in the record and would not be leaving it. Lily was harder to find and easier to understand once found. She was 8 now, living with her maternal grandmother outside Ashland. Her grandmother was a woman named Ruth, who had spent 3 years learning to manage the specific aftermath of what her granddaughter had carried home from a foster placement, which was to say, she had spent 3 years sitting beside Lily in the dark when the dark was too much, leaving doors open even when the house was cold, letting Lily make the rules about what came in and what stayed out. Ruth was not a patient woman by nature. She had become one because Lily required it, and the becoming had cost her something, and had also given her something she had not expected, which was the specific kind of clarity that comes from doing something very hard for someone you love without reservation. When the caseworker called Ruth, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Lily made a report 2 years ago to her therapist." A pause. "I thought it went somewhere." "It did," the caseworker said. "It went to Karen Voss's county coordinator, who marked it, acknowledged, and took no action." Ruth was quiet again. "Lily stopped talking about it," she said. "I thought that meant she was getting better." "She was getting better," the caseworker said. "Getting better doesn't mean the thing that hurt her wasn't real." Ruth absorbed that. "What does she need to do now?" "Nothing," the caseworker said. "She doesn't need to do anything. Her disclosure is in the record. The prosecution has what it needs. Lily gets to just be 8. Ruth put the phone down and went to find Lily, who was at the kitchen table drawing. She was always drawing. Ruth sat beside her and looked at the drawing, which was a house with many windows and a dog in the yard and a door standing open. And she put her hand over her granddaughter's hand without saying anything. Lily kept drawing. "Grandma," Lily said. "Yes?" "Is it over?" Ruth thought about what to say. She thought about the caseworker's words, and the acknowledgement letter, and the new protocols, and the resignation, and the charges, and all the administrative machinery of correction grinding through its process. She thought about what over meant to an 8-year-old who had counted the sounds of a locked door for 14 months. "The part that kept hurting you," Ruth said, "that part is over." Lily looked at the drawing. She looked at the open door. "Okay," she said. She kept drawing. Marcus returned to Copper Falls on a Saturday in late April. He did not call ahead. He drove up from Chicago on his first full leave day in 6 weeks, Scout in the back seat, the 2 drawings in the duffel, the same duffel that had carried them through 2 different bases and 1 Pacific training rotation, and the specific, ordinary chaos of a deployment cycle that had not stopped for January in Wisconsin or for a 6-year-old who counted to 1,000. He parked outside the cell house. He sat for a moment. Scout stood up in the back seat and pressed his nose to the window. The front door opened before Marcus got out of the truck. Ava came down the porch steps with the specific determination of a child moving towards something she had been expecting and had decided to meet directly rather than wait for. She was taller than January, not by much, but her posture was different. The curvature that Marcus had recognized, the specific physical signature of a child who had been bracing for impact, was gone. She stood straight. She looked like a person who had remembered that the floor was reliable. She went to Scout first. She always went to Scout first, which was correct, and which Marcus would never find anything other than completely right. She crouched and put her hands on his face, and Scout pressed his forehead against her palms and held it there, amber eyes closing halfway in the specific expression of an animal that has found something it was looking for. "You grew," Marcus said. Ava looked up. "A little bit," she said seriously. Then, "You came back." "I said I would." She stood. She looked at him with the evaluating attention that was still her most reliable instrument, but had lost the desperate edge it had carried in January. It was just clear-eyed now. Curious. The look of a child who was learning to assess the world not for threat, but for truth. "Diane says the charges are final," she said. "She told me what that means." "What does it mean to you?" Marcus asked. Ava thought about it. "It means she can't do it again," she said. "Not to anyone." "That's what it means," Marcus said. She nodded. Then she looked at Scout. "Does he remember me?" "He remembered you before we got out of the truck," Marcus said. Ava looked at Scout's amber eyes, and Scout looked back at her, and the specific recognition between them was not performed and did not require explanation. She smiled. It was a real smile, not the surprised, tentative curve Marcus had seen in January, the smile of a child testing whether joy was permitted, but the ordinary, unguarded smile of a person who is where they want to be. Tom and Margaret came out. Margaret had coffee, and did not offer it so much as simply produce it, the way people who have been doing things for others for a long time make comfort feel like air rather than effort. They sat on the porch, all of them, while Ava and Scout moved through the backyard. Ava showing him the crocus that had become 3 crocuses since Tuesday. Scout investigating each one with the methodical attention he gave to things Ava pointed at. "She's sleeping through the night," Margaret said. She said it the way you say things that cost something to watch become true. "First month was hard. Second month was better." A pause. "Last 3 weeks she's been waking up and going back to sleep on her own." She looked at the yard. "She leaves her door open. She doesn't close it, even in the cold. But she's sleeping." "That's everything," Marcus said. "It really is," Margaret said. Tom looked at Scout in the yard, patient and deliberate, following Ava from crocus to crocus with the unhurried attention of an animal that understood that this, exactly this, was what it was built for. "She talks about him," he said. "When she draws dogs, they all have amber eyes." Marcus looked at the drawings Ava was making in the yard with a stick in the dirt. Shapes he could not see from the porch, but which he understood were probably houses with open doors and dogs with the right colored eyes. He thought about January, about the lobby and the fluorescent light, and the organized folder, and the word resolved applied like a lid over a truth that refused to stay down. He thought about Scout in the 30 seconds after Karen Voss came through the door. The chest sound, the ears, the repositioning. He thought about what it had taken to get from that moment to this porch in April. Not a great dramatic intervention, not force or strategy or the particular skills that 11 years of service had built into him. Presence. The specific decision to not move when moving would have been entirely reasonable. To stay in the lobby. To trust the dog. To keep his body between a child and the room until the room ran out of reasons to ask him to step aside. Ava came back to the porch. Scout walked beside her with the easy, grounded stride of an animal in its right territory. She had dirt on her hands and something in her expression that Marcus had not seen in January and recognized now as what it was. Peace. Not the absence of hard things. The presence of enough good ones that the hard things had stopped being the whole weather. She stood in front of Marcus. "I finished the drawing," she said. "The one I was going to make." "Can I see it?" She held up her hands, which were dirty. "I need paper," she said. "I did it in the dirt." "Tell me what it was," Marcus said. She thought about how to describe it. The serious, deliberate way she approached things she wanted to say correctly. "It was the police station," she said. "But different. Not scary different, just different." She paused. "The doors were open, and you and Scout were outside. Not inside waiting. Outside. Like you were leaving." She looked at him. "Because you didn't have to stay anymore." Marcus held that for a moment. "Because it was okay," Ava said. "It was okay, so you could go." He looked at Scout, who was sitting beside Ava, with his amber eyes on Marcus, and his breathing slow, and his tail making one low, certain movement. The movement of an animal that had finished its work and knew it. Marcus looked at the yard, at the crocuses, at the April light on the fence. He looked at a child who had counted to 1,000 in the dark, and had run toward the right thing and had been correct, and who was now standing on a porch in spring with dirt on her hands and her shoulders level and her door open behind her. He felt something release in his chest. Not the loud release of a held breath. The quiet release of something that had been carried correctly and had now found its destination and could be set down at last. "Yeah," he said. "It's okay." Scout stood up. He pressed his flank against Ava's leg once, the warm, certain contact of something that knows what it's saying. And then he walked to Marcus's side and sat. Ava looked at them both. She was not sad. She was 6 years old, and it was April, and there were crocuses in the yard, and the door behind her was open, and the light coming through it was warm. She did not need them to stay. She did not need anything to be different from what it was. She had run toward the right thing in the dark, and the right thing had held still until the morning came. That was the whole story. That was all of it. That was enough. Sometimes God does not send what you expect. He sends a man who came in for paperwork, and a dog who read the room in 30 seconds. And he makes them stand still in a lobby in January until the truth that has been waiting for years finally finds a surface to land on. Not with thunder, not with announcement, just with presence and patience, and the specific grace of refusing to walk away. A little girl ran through the snow and found that. She held onto it until the morning. And the morning, when it finally came, was everything she had been counting toward.